Good morning. Welcome to Sunday School again at Mount Harmony Free Baptist Church. I want to again thank you for your time that you dedicate to watch these videos. And again, I want to thank you for just watching and some of you letting me know that you watch. And we always appreciate that, to hear that somebody is watching them. And I do want to thank you for your time. Title of our lesson today is Evidence All Around Us. And we're going to continue on that theme that we started last week in Genesis chapter 1. Matter of fact, we're going to go back to Genesis chapter 1 for just a few moments this morning. But we're going to look at, there's evidence all around us that something made what we're in. Something made us. You just can't happenstance and mankind evolves into what we are. You can't just happenstance and the cosmos and the stars and the planets and the sun become what they are. And they're all in such a delicate balance. It's not happenstance. And we're going to see where the Bible is going to point out to us today that you can just look around you and tell that there is a great design. There is a creator just by looking at nature. Again, the title of our lesson is Evidence All Around Us. And we're going to bounce around. We're going to look at different scriptures in different places in the Old and New Testament. To me, that's a little harder to go over. It's a little harder to teach than just taking a passage and going through it. But that's the way our lesson is set up today. We're going to look at something caused it all. And that's Genesis 1:1. We read that last week. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. Now, I just said to my cameraman, Mr. Ben Hobbs, Brother Ben, that sometimes we can take something simple and make it complex. And I nearly think the writers of our Sunday school material tried to do that with this section. And they tried to show a cause and effect, and because we did this. But I think that if we can just read it like we did last week, in the beginning God created. You know what? If you can understand that, the fewer words the better. Look how the writer of Genesis describes it. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. You know what? And then that's it. That's the kind of the end of his statement there. And he goes on and he describes, the process, but that's enough. God created. And we can step back and look around and believe. And we're going to follow that up with some verses today to prove our point. But that's enough. God created. I think just by looking around, and again, we're going to talk about this more in a few minutes, that you can tell there was a design to this. It wasn't something that just happened. It wasn't something over eons of time that evolved into this. Okay? I will get in trouble sometimes because I will use the word of something evolved, and I will mean that it changed to adapt to its surrounding. That's a definition of that. That's perfectly logical. That all the dark-colored rabbits in places full of snow were eaten by predators, and so they evolved to all the rabbits in places with a lot of snow or light-colored hair. That they evolved. They adapted to their surrounding. It was kind of survival of the fittest. We see that. But to say that something changed species, it just makes no sense, whatever. So, in the beginning, God created. Okay? Let's move on to our second section. And its design indicates a designer. Let's flip over to Romans chapter 1. Romans chapter 1. Now, we're going to look at two passages here to prove our point biblically that there was a designer. Romans chapter 1, and let's slide down to verse 19. And this is Paul writing, and he says, because that which may be known of God is manifest or made known in them, for God hath shown it unto them. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Now, I always tell my Sunday school class when we had the ability to meet in person, and we will be able to again sometime. When you read Paul, I have to back up and get it into high-togi English. I don't read that way, I don't write that way, and I certainly do not speak the way that Paul wrote. But what we want to see, Paul is saying that if you will look up and look around you, you can tell there is a God of creation. All people groups have recognized this is made by something greater than me. And what Paul is saying, in essence here, if you'll look down to verse 20, that we know there's a God of creation because we can see creation. And what Paul is doing here, he's building a case throughout the book of Romans, but he's building a case here because we can see with our eyes, we can sense with our hands, our feel, we can taste, we can smell, we can hear. We realize the majesty of creation. And because of that, when we stand before the Lord, there's no excuse because creation identifies there's a God. Let's follow that point up and let's flip over to Psalms chapter 19. Psalms 19. And let's look at verse 1. This is the way David describes it. It says, "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork." He said, look around you, and you can tell that there's a design. There's a master plan to how this was put together. It wasn't happenstance. It wasn't a freak accident. It wasn't the right place at the right time. It was an almighty God with a design, designed perfectly the world. Let's move on. Let's look at our third section here. Our sense of right and wrong points to a righteous God. Let's go way back to Romans. Okay, we just left there, but we're going back. Romans chapter 2. Romans chapter 2. And you know, if you watch the news now, we have a group of people, our nation, that thinks they've been wronged by everything. If it's not their way, they've been wronged. They've been mistreated. A lot of them just need to grow up. And it's easy to say those doggone kids, well, it's their doggone parents. Okay, it's a couple generations we're into this now. But what we want to see out of this is God has instilled into us a sense of right and wrong. That doesn't mean that we're morally right. That doesn't mean we're spiritually right. But it does mean that we have a sense of, hey, I don't think that's right. Hey, you know what? I think that's wrong. We need to stay away from that. Let's look at Romans chapter 2, verses 12 through 15. Verse 12 says, "For as much as we have sinned without law, shall also perish without law. And as many as have sinned in the law shall be judged by the law. For not the hearers of the law are just before God, but the doers of the law shall be justified." Verse 14. "For when the Gentiles which have not the law do by nature the things contained in the law, these having not the law, which are a law unto themselves, which showeth the work of the law written in their hearts, their consciences also bearing witness, and their thoughts the mean, while accusing or also excusing one another." Now, again, that's deep. Paul's smarter than Jonathan. Okay? But what Paul's saying, again, where he's building a case in Romans. But what Paul is saying is, listen, he started out in Romans chapter 1 and said, you can look around and tell there's a God. Even if you've never heard of God, you can look around and say, there is something greater than me because of all of this. And now he's building his case here, and he says that, he's talking to Jews first, and he said, you had the law. But then he points down to those Gentiles, us, and he said, they don't have the law, and they still know some things are right and some things are wrong. And he's saying God impressed that upon them. God gave that to them. And he said, just knowing the law is not good enough. Doing the law, remember he said that in verse 13. But then he gets down and he talks about the Gentiles, and he says, they don't know the law, but they have the law written in their hearts. Okay? Now what he means by that is, our ancestors, as Gentiles, they didn't have access to the law of Moses. But what Paul is saying, in spite of the fact that our ancestors, Gentiles, did not have that, God had written that law in their hearts that we knew to steal was wrong. Okay? Because even in that Gentile time that this is written, There was laws punishing murder and theft. Adultery was frowned upon. All those things that we're talking about in the Ten Commandments, the law, Paul is pointing out that the Gentiles, even without the law, knew that was wrong. Okay? So his case is, God impressed that upon us. So if we go back and look at Paul's argument that he's building throughout Romans, one, he says that we can look around and see that God's a God of creation just with our eyes. And then two, we were given, because the impression we're in God's image is still there, to find that righteousness. It's not in us. We're not born right. But there's something there to tell us we need to strive for it. Okay? Let's flip on then to Hebrews chapter 10, verse 16. Hebrews 10:16. Continuing this thought. This is the covenant that I will make with them after those days, saith the Lord. I will put my laws into their hearts and in their minds, and I will write them. Now, again, I'm not a big fan of jumping and pulling one verse out of like what we're doing right now. But we're proving the point, whether Paul wrote this or someone else in Hebrews, that is still written upon our heart. We have an innate sense of what's right and wrong. Okay? It doesn't matter if you grew up in a Christian home or not. Your parents tried to get you to act right, and to talk right, to do right. They expected certain things of you, and that's the argument we're trying to make, is that's in us is a desire. Okay, and that's given to us by God. What the writer is trying to convince us here is, because we have creation, because we can see these things, because God is the God of creation, because God is the God and creator of us, there's a desire in us to find Him. Now, does that mean everyone will find Him? Of course not. But it's not a lack of His effort in reaching out. Does that mean everyone will act right and do right? Of course it doesn't, because He gave us a free will, and we get to decide. But that designer of all the universe designed us to have that desire. And He wants us to know Him. And that's the reason He reveals Himself through the creation. That's the reason He reveals Himself and has that His law written in our hearts and our minds. It's an innate thing. It's just like that bird that flies south for the winter. It's in him. God gave us that. Now, we don't have to follow it, but He gave us that to reveal who He is, because God desires that all of us, in spite of how we're born as a sinner, He has a desire that someday we come to know Him in the free pardon of sin. Guys, it's a short lesson, and it's a lesson that we can look at and say, well, God created everything. That's good enough. It is, but there's a reason He reveals Himself to us through His creation. Guys, thank you again. I appreciate your time. I encourage you just to step outside during the day or during the night and look around and see God's handiwork. You can't look up in the stars at night and say, you know what? There was just a bang, a swirling hot gas, ball of gas exploded and all this created. There's no way you can tell me you can look up in the stars and believe that. Guys, we need to appreciate the majesty of our Creator. We need to appreciate what He's done for us and what He wants to do for us. Guys, again, if you're a Christian, if you called upon the name of the Lord, you accepted Him as your personal Savior, we win. The God that flung the stars into existence is watching out for us, and He's building a home for heaven in us. Guys, thank you, and I appreciate your time. Have a good day.